to be discreet with what my real name is. But yeah, a Thunderous one, born in 1968 in the United Kingdom. I am what at the time you would call during the 70s mixed race or half caste or in current political terms now I have to use the term dual heritage. So I'm part Asian and part English. But that doesn't mean to say that though I was born mixed race, that you're not raised as a full Muslim, as it were. If your father is a Muslim, then it goes by nature that you'll be raised up as a Muslim in the Pakistani community of the United Kingdom. So the reason why I mentioned why or what year I was born in '68 is because there is a kind of relevance that you're seeing the first generation of the immigrants that came over to the United Kingdom in the 50s and the early 60s, that first generation of those that came over. But also being 56 this year that I am, you're also seeing the first generation as well as of mixed race or dual heritage or half caste children, not just with Asians, but with the black community as well. And I think it's at this point, it might be a good points as well of reference that to give an idea, a visual idea of what it's like to be brought up with, say, a Pakistani father and an English mother, I would highly recommend the movie East is East. I would say that much of what's in that movie, about a good 80% of that, is absolutely factual. That is a very, very good account as to what it's like to be raised up as a Muslim in the United Kingdom, particularly during that period of time. So yeah, raised Muslim in the community, but I don't, and I think I've said this before on Lloyd's show, I certainly said it on Naria's show, that though I was raised as a Muslim, my father in fact was actually a communist. He wasn't really a Muslim, wow. Not in any sense. I think what people have to understand is that when you're brought up as a Muslim in the Muslim community, much of what you do is done by rote or it's done by culture. It's a cultural expectation. So though I was raised as a Muslim, the Quran school wasn't something that I had to go because my father expected me to go there to learn Islam and to become a good Muslim. It was predicated on the expectations of the Muslim community of the country at the time. So that's just right. What you do, as it were. Oh. And when you're in Quran school, what tends to happen is everything that you learn is in Arabic. It's a language, so you learn the alphabet, and then you learn how to join up the writing, and then from there it progresses to the memorization of the Quran. So it's not really, you're not taking in information in a manner that you actually understand and can digest. So the illustration I would use is it's very much like we speak English in this country, and we use the English alphabet symbols in order to form words that then construct sentences. Now, we can use those same symbols to, say, write something in French. In fact, the French language uses English symbols in its language. So an English person that can't speak French can, in effect, get a French newspaper and almost read what is in the newspaper, though not necessarily understanding it, of what he's actually reading. In the same way, in pretty much, I would say, around the world, when you are in Quran school and you're learning things in Arabic, you're learning it in an Arabic text, and you could possibly read it, but that does not mean that you actually understand what you're reading. So everything is sort of perfunctory and by rote. You're not really taking any information.
So you can read it, but you don't necessarily understand. You can read and pronounce the words, but you don't necessarily understand the meanings.
Exactly. And that's what East is East is very good at. It actually shows you, and it teaches with violence as well. So that when I say it teaches with violence, they teach you in a form of rhythmic patterns. Okay, so there's a lot of rocking forward, back and forth, and I think that's a methodology in order to memorize the words, because you're memorizing them to a rhythm, very much like the way that people would learn, upon repetition, how they would pick up the words to a song. But when you're asked to recite what you've learned and you make an error, you are inflicted with an injury, probably with a rod or a stick or some kind of implement. So it's a lesson not taught with love. it's a formula taught with violence. Okay, there is punishment at the end if you don't get anything right. And from my observation, because I lived in Pakistan for about 6 months, it happens over there as well. So that's how Islam is taught until you get to a certain point where you start learning it for yourself in your own language, where you get hold of a copy of the Quran.
You're punished if you don't learn.
You're punished if you don't learn. You're punished if you don't learn correctly as well, depending on the type of imams and what influences that they have in that community as well. The higher up or more respected he is, the more that they can get away with.
Right. I have 10 questions that are on the screen. I'm sharing them with you now as well, and also to the audience. But we can use these, or we can also just, take audience questions if the audience have any questions, and then we can also, as we bounce off the conversation. But you mentioned your father was a communist, so you escaped that. How did you not become a communist yourself?
Communism is predicated on atheism. So as I said, part 2, I might touch on that, because atheism in itself is predicated on Darwinian evolution. So I bypassed the whole
communism is also atheistic, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So communism is basically atheism, but atheism in itself is predicated on Darwinian evolution. So I have to study Darwinian evolution in order to make decisions as to how I view the world. Okay, so that would possibly be more suited to the part 2 when I talk about why I didn't accept atheism and Darwinian evolution. Yeah. So I'm just reading another question. Can you share with us your journey from where were in specific events or experiences that led you to leave Islam and embrace Christianity? The embrace Christianity would probably be part 3, why I accept the biblical narrative, as I call it. But as far as specific events or experiences, there are too numerous. I think one has to bear in mind that when I talk about Islam, I'm going to use the word Islam. But when I talk about brown-skinned people, I'm going to refer to the Sikhs and the Hindus as well. Because what people don't seem to understand is that the religions may be different, but the culture is pretty much exactly the same. So you can have a community with people, say Sikhs in there. Well, let's say Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims as an example. They all wear the same clothes. They all speak the same language. They all speak the same, eat the same foods. And they pretty much speak the same language, have cultural similarities. It's only the religions that divide, yet there are many things that are in common between them, if that makes sense. So if you're brought up in the Muslim community, you will pretty much understand what Sikhs are. You'll pretty much understand what Hindus are as well. So that's pretty much when I refer to brown-skinned people, that's who I'm referring to. And there's a reason why I say this, because it's going to come out a little bit later on as to the worldview that these people have against non-brown-skinned people. So just going back to things that started to question why I left Islam, one has to bear in mind being brought up in the 70s in this country. For those who are of my generation will remember that when you went to school, you had things like assembly, and there were certain Christian lessons that you had at school. And I was always fascinated from a very young age about Jesus. I mean, that there was just something about this guy. We would have little ladybird books about Jesus, and you would learn about Jesus. But I can't remember anything in particular because of we're talking about nearly 50 years ago now. But Jesus kind of featured quite predominantly very much in school activity, as it were. But also in the 70s, growing up, there was a lot of gospel, if you like, programs on TV. There was a lot of Christian TV. There'd be programs about, say, for instance, the Turin Shroud, or there'd be worship programs on a Sunday. So Christianity in the UK at the time was pretty much still a show of force or a strength in the community. It held community cohesively together with its objective moral values. So being raised as a Muslim, you had that influence as well. But being raised as a Muslim, though, you are pretty much told from the Quran school and the community, being in the Pakistani community, white people will never accept you. They hate you. you will not be accepted by them. So at a very young age, there's an inculcation process of that. The community and the country that you live in will never accept you because of what you are. You're brown-skinned and you're Muslim, and these people will hate you. So a lot
That
of
destroys any hope of integration or loyalty.
it starts from a very young age as well. This is why when you're looking at the communities around the country, predominantly with the Muslim community and with the Hindu community as well, they're very insular. They don't integrate. The Hindus are very much the same, but with the Hindu community, they're not belligerents. They're not antagonistic. They just keep themselves to themselves. They don't overtly behave in a manner that brings any kind of reproach on their community. If anything that you would say negative about the Hindu community is that their corner shops are too expensive. Other than that, you don't really hear anything in the media about the Hindu community, but the Hindu community is quite big in this country, and I dare say in other European countries as well, there's a big Hindu community, but you don't really hear anything from them. The Sikh community is very much like the same as the Hindu community. They don't behave in a manner that brings reproach on their community. You know, they're very sort of like acting up. I don't know if this is the right word to put it, in a very covert way. You just wouldn't see them around. They don't bring reproach in the way of criminal activity. The Hindus are very much the same. They don't bring reproach on the community, but by being deliberately embroiled in politics. They don't bring reproach on their communities by being deliberately antagonistic with local communities and such. So the Sikh and the Hindus behave in a very sort of like, they're insular, but they don't behave in a manner that brings reproach. Whereas the Islamic community, you're taught at a very young age, hate and dislike. That's not what you're to do. That's what the English will do to you. So the natural, if you like, reaction to that is, well, if they're not going to like me, I'm not going to like them. I personally was a little bit different. I'm not suggesting I'm an exception. I was a little bit different to react in that kind of way. So that's pretty much how it is being brought up as a Muslim in this country. You really, it's a community with a community. It's a law within the law, and it's almost like a mini culture, a mini country in itself. The community, in the fact that there are cultural walls that don't allow other communities to penetrate.
They call them parallel communities.
Parallel communities, exactly that. Yeah.
Now that's interesting. But they create, even if there aren't any, they create this artificial barrier to exclude native Brits from being friends with native Brits.
But then they have a crafty manner of saying, but it's their fault. The Muslims are the Muslim community, and I dare say by extension other communities, are very good, and we're seeing it in the media today. The Muslims are probably the first to do this. They're very good at creating a problem, then playing the victim. And that's how we pretty much see the Muslim community behaving.
But that's an old strategy. Look at every single war in the Middle East against Israel. Israel was attacked, and then they fight back. And then the Muslims turn around and then cry and then claim that they're the victims.
Yeah, exactly that. So the number 4 question asks, what aspects of Christianity resonated with you and drew you towards the faith? I think that's a very good question, because there's two scriptures that come to mind when answering that. Genesis 1:26, where God says, let's make man in our image. So when you're looking at Genesis 1:26 and it says, let's make man in our image, that's clearly kind of like, as human beings, we reflect godly qualities, love, peace, wisdom, righteousness and such. You don't see any of those qualities in Islam. But you can't avoid, as a human being, those qualities that you're imbued with. And the other one I would think is probably Romans 3 or Romans 5, where Paul talks about the flesh being weak and miserable man that I am. When I want to do good, what is bad is present with me. It's only when you start looking at scriptures in the Bible that you can actually see, like the book of James says, like the Bible is like a reflection, is like a mirror. You look at the mirror and you see yourself in it. So when can you just go back to that question?
Okay, let me go here. Yeah.
I forgot what the question was because I was just leading.
The questions. My bad. We were asking.
Oh, so what Christians resonated with you? So go using the word resonate then. So I would say when you it's only when you look at the scriptures of the Bible that you can see that there are certain characteristics that resonate with you. So when you look at Genesis 1:26, another one would be Ecclesiastes, where it talks about I think it's Ecclesiastes, where it talks about time indefinite is put in their heart that mankind might find out the works that the true God has made from the start to the finish. So there are certain things that you read in the Bible that you think that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. But when you start reading the Quran, you start reading the Quran in English, in the language that you understand, there is nothing that resonates with you. There is nothing that resonates with a person. And I've often said, growing up as a Muslim, if you're a person that likes to hate, if you're a person full of anger, if you're a person that wants to inflict violence on people, but you need a justification in order to do that, Islam is the perfect religion for you. It is the religion of hate. It is the religion of violence. It is the religion of belligerence. So if that's the kind of person that you are, and you want a religion that resonates, go choose Islam. Right. But if one of the parallels that you learn as you're growing up about what's the influences of Christianity, where you come across these, and then being brought up as a Muslim, you know how you see Islam in action within the community as to how they treat, girls of my age, and then you see it as to like women of your mother's generation, how they are treated. How if you went to a friend's house or a family's house, the women are in one room while the men are in another room. So it's sort of like there's a two-tiered class system. The men would eat first, and then the children would eat with the women second. So
how old were you again when you decided to make the conversion?
Well, we took the things. I didn't. Well, I convert. It was a natural conclusion. I don't call it conversion. I call it a natural conclusion to reconcile with God, because that's what Christianity is, isn't it? It's your reconciliation.
It took years, but how old were you when it started to maybe when it finished?
I would say that I had questions when I was at home that if there is a truth, as it were, Islam could not possibly be the truth with what I was reading, how violent it was, how mendacious it is, how hateful it is, how spiteful it is, not just within the text of the Quran, as I managed to get one in English, but also you see the manifestation within the Islamic community. You would hear things, for instance, the Muslim community behind closed doors saying things about, say, Palestine's a good example, or any other sort of like political movement taking place in the world where Islam felt that it was being pressured or persecuted. They would have one language that was inside closed doors, then you'd have another one that was there in the public community. So what we're seeing is pure hypocrisy.
Your family know that you've left Islam, and how do they dealt with it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I made no secret about it, because when it's very much, you've got to bear in mind, when born in the 60s, and growing up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the whistleblowers were a very real thing in, say, politics and commerce. So you learn that to stand and be counted for what you believe is something that's to be valued. So I made no secret about me leaving Islam and going along with the biblical narrative. Made no secret of that. I've told now. This is not an idol, but this is not a boast or anything like that, and I don't want it to be perceived as such. But I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. I can handle myself. I've been in prison a couple of times for violence. So I'm not suggesting, I'm not saying that in a very boastful way, because it's nothing to boast about. But I think what I'm trying to say is I wasn't some kind of timid little boy that was somehow going to be easily intimidated back into Islam. I could handle myself at the time, and so that just made it easier for me to stand up against any sort of like a response I was going to get. But also someone has to make a stand. And the thing is, you see, I don't think I'm some kind of exception. I think really the reality is that there are a lot of people that are brought up in the Sikh, Hindu and Muslim community that don't actually follow the tenets of their faith systems. Because the one thing I did learn when being grown up as a Muslim is just how many of these people, when they leave their faith systems, actually go over towards communism and atheism.
Right.
And
why do you think they go towards atheism and not Christianity? I mean, aren't they being invited to church? Aren't they being evangelized? Why the move to atheism after? I mean, was it just that they've been on such an extreme end that they snap back to the other extreme?
I think that's a very good question. My only answer to that is that when I came to understand the biblical narrative, the Bible is very clear and candid that Satan runs the planet. Of that, there's no doubt. 1 John 5:19, Revelation 12:7-9, Jesus' baptism, when Satan says, "I'll give you all these kingdoms if you do an act of worship." The first chapter of the book of Job. So the scriptures are quite clear. So it's then when you look back on, say, world history, particularly with Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, as those were the religions I grew up with, you can see why they turn to atheism. It's because of how absurd their faith systems are. Their faith system's so absurd. But then one of the arguments that many people have as to why they become atheists is because they can't reconcile the evil they see in the world, the injustice, because if there is a God, then surely God will do something about it. Now, the biblical narrative gives the perfect answer for that, but their faith systems don't. So what it does is, as they're growing up in their faith systems, they see the stupidity or the barbarity of their own faith systems, but they're very emotionally connected to the injustice in the world. And what they don't recognize is that they're made in God's image. No wonder that the injustice, resonates with them, because they're reflecting God's qualities, but they don't see it. So the easy answer in all of this is that there is no God, or if there is a God, they become agnostic, and atheism is sort of like a central idea to them that they can draw some kind of, if you like, solidarity with. Well, one of the things I love, for instance, when I go to, say, a Muslim funeral, or the last two that I've been to, it occurs to me that these people aren't really Muslim. They're just a brown-skinned gang. Islam is just the name of a gang. It's a bit like the Bloods or the Crips. It's just what you're born into. And it's the same thing today with Muslims. When they say that our prophet is Muhammad, they're basically saying this child rapist is our prophet.
Yeah, no. And they're not going to get away with that, because we've now learned all about Islam. The internet has opened this door. We often know Islam better than Muslims do. But we need to take a serious stand, because these guys are committed, and I'm not sure how committed we are to ending this. But yeah, I'd like to wind down here, Thunderous, and maybe we can pick this up again next Sunday. We get to continue the conversation then.
Yeah. Well, let's continue. Can I just ask people in the chat, can you formulate some sentences? I was trying to do this very ad hoc tonight, and I thought when I went on Thaddeus's show and on Nuria's show, both of them had a list of questions, and tonight's show I thought I'll do very ad hoc, and I don't think I probably covered any of the points that I wanted to, or many of the points that I wanted to cover. So next week I'd like to discuss, if there's any further questions about Islam, please ask them. But I really want to touch on why I didn't accept atheism and Darwinian evolution next time. Okay. So if you've got any questions, put them in the chat.
Okay, that'll be great. Yeah, so drop those, and we'll cover those next week. So we hope to have at least 3 of these conversations on this topic, on Thunderous's journey out of Islam towards Christianity and why he detests atheism. So yeah, so guys, thank you very much for your time. Over 100 of you, that's fantastic.